before we get into the conversation, I have to give a few thank yous. Firstly, to these amazing artists who trusted me and agreed to let me curate them into this exhibition. Thank you guys. Secondly, to the amazing staff and team at MOCAD who helped me figure out my curatorial vision and shape it into a reality. So Alicia, Larry, Zeb, and Tim, thank you guys so much. And Ford Foundation for their financial support. So they support the Ford Curatorial Fellows here at MOCAD, as well as you guys for showing up. So thanks for being here tonight. We were gonna get more chairs. I'm so happy to have you all here. So as Amy mentioned, my name is Jova, and I had the pleasure of working with these 6 artists to curate Useless Utility. One of the goals of this exhibition for me was to highlight the work of regional artists, specifically living in southeastern Michigan at the most northern point of the American Rust Belt. And so I wondered what it meant to be an artist practicing in this region, specifically since this region was sort of built on this premise of labor. When I talk about the Rust Belt, I'm talking about largely cities and landscapes that have been shaped under the notion of labor, particularly industrial labor. And so I wondered how artists dealt with creating works that, though purposeful, plays with the traditional notion of use. And I am super happy to introduce you to these 6 artists who make very, very different work. Although some of them overlap in terms of medium-based backgrounds, their works are all really different. So what we're gonna do tonight is I'm gonna go through and introduce each artist, and then we're gonna ask them one question and sort of hear from them about their practice before having a larger conversation as a group. So, Tony Rave is to my right, Osman Khan, Tana Bui, did I pronounce it right? Okay. Iris Eichenberg, James Benjamin Franklin, and Tiff Massey. So we're gonna start with James. James, I see your work as a disruption of traditional painting, specifically thinking about your older works, such as this one above. I'm wondering about how you shifted from sort of narrative-based work into more non-literal, abstract disruptions of painting.
Good question.
If we need to go back, we can.
Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
yeah, the figurative work, that piece is now 11 years old. At the time, this group of work at this period of time, I started departing from the figurative work, feeling that this kind of self-referential narrative that I was using was very how do I say it? I felt very restricted by it. I wanted to open up the process through materials. Now, it was a very slow process, leaving the figurative work, going into this piece, which is from last year, and also the other work on the what I wanted or starting to desire. I was just kind of getting exhausted by the process of making those figurative works, and also feeling limited by the story or the narrative of it, and wanting something more out of the works, and wanted to expand something about materials. So that was my kind of inherent, not inherent, that was the underlying kind of desire, was trying to free myself up. So it wasn't really until I got to my first year in grad school that I had the opportunity to just kind of explode everything, completely rethink my relationship to painting, and thinking about other ways to build a structure to create a new narrative through a material process. So, and I mean, this is pretty recent, so this is kind of the world I'm in right now.
Can you talk about a little bit about the materiality that's featured here?
Yeah, well, so it's not on a canvas, it's made of, the substrate is a plaster substrate with wire. I use that because I can create shapes. The idea, the initial idea how this came about was feeling restricted by the frame of a painting. Feeling like the square, the rectangle was very inhibiting, and I was reacting, my imagery was reacting to that, so I became so precious about the object. So what I wanted to do, so I started creating my own shapes, and they're awkward and unyielding, so the imagery changed with it. I had a completely different bodily kind of reaction to it. So the materials that are in here, it's a fabric, dyed fabric, towels, anything to kind of disrupt the surface and open up another possibility for the viewer to kind of get into it and get lost as a kind of an opening into the work, and to me, creating some sort of mystery in the abstraction or that place.
Awesome. We're going to hold there and keep going. Speaking of narrative, Diana, your work deals a lot with personal narratives. So it refers to James, who deals with a lot of the abstraction of narrative. Yours is a more personal sort of basis from which you draw out your practice. Can you sort of talk about how you make connections between your personal narrative to larger issues? How does this inform your process? There's a lot of reproduction in the work.
A couple things. I think, so going back to what you were saying, James, about narrative, and you were feeling a little stifled, I think, working from images so much. And I just think about the piece that's in there now. I start working with an image, and then I move into this three-dimensional space after the fact. But I think the thing about personal work is that we think if you make personal work, then it's very self-obsessive, like you're self-absorbent. And I think that's a very self-absorbent way to think about personal work, because everything we're doing is not very unique to us. And I remember in grad school, my friend was like, and I grew up in foster care, so a lot of my work is starting out with that conversation of not having access to my family and having to move around so much, or having access to personal memorabilia, and having to interrogate my family for information about my life. And thinking about that, and my friend was like, what makes your story so unique? I was like, that's a really good question. It's not very unique. And that's helpful. So then you don't think that you're doing something that's so personal that no one's gonna understand it. You're like, it's about loss and redemption and displacement. We've all felt that way in some way. Even if you didn't feel it in your family, you felt it with your friends. You felt it with your relationships. And so that made me feel free to work from images. And I'm still working that way, but I do sometimes look at the image and think about what's around the image and what can a person take from it that's not directly about my narrative. And the lamp, for example, is just a lamp that I saw in a photograph, a very old photograph, that belonged to my grandmother, who I never got to meet. And I was like, I want to recreate that lamp. And that was the first thing I thought of. So I'm not necessarily thinking about foster care, but that story is there. And so sometimes it just snowballs into something that can become abstract, which goes back to your work, James, right? Where the image moves forward and starts to become its own thing that is not representational. But I'm still trying to recreate that moment that I wasn't a part of. The picture was taken in the 60s and I wasn't born. And my sister was like, what's that lamp about? So having to talk to my sister, who's not an artist, and then she's like, oh, I didn't know the style of that furniture. I didn't know we had that furniture at all until I created art. So I'm always thinking about, I guess, the underlying narrative and how do I connect it to others, or how does other people get to see it? And I think it's a lamp, but we all know what that is. So, and then the hot cones, it's like, okay, that's more of a subculture conversation. And also coming from a printmaking background where multiples are innate, that's what you do with printmaking, and to purposely stop doing stopped doing additions, and I'd make one of a kinds, which is like, it was printmaking. But and I remember starting out doing additions and thinking about multiples, and I was thinking of my family, and if I can recreate this image that's really rare, and who can get that image? So if we don't have photographs when we were little, and there's only one, and there's 4 of us, I can make multiples and give us all this photograph. So that's how I thought about it. So my audience was my family, not anyone else. And then from there, it just went into a whole nother conversation.
Thank you. Iris, in your work, you reference landscapes, both natural and those found in domestic spaces. This is an example of a piece that's from the series Setting the Table. It's also in useless utility, though it is not displayed as a whole. But that sort of landscape is referenced in the texture that you use within your work, textural objects. Can you talk a little bit about how you navigate sort of the notion of landscape and texture in your work?
I think you've chosen quite good examples for that, because by seeing that that ball which disappears basically in a building in a sort of gymnastic setting, not representing a body, but sort of having the physical quality of a body, but also seducing the body to find itself in the shape, in the surface, in the textual landscape. And then you have 2 images where you see a walled-up carpet, which, again, through sort of a long time of contemplation and making and labor is a very important one. Process labor, time-consuming labor is a way how I charge those landscapes of all sorts. So if you look at that, that is the model, that is the representation of the landscape I grew up in. It's a German landscape, it's a very specific landscape, and I think only those who grew up in it can immediately identify it. So it's exclusive and inclusive at the same time. And then in the next image, which you have there in front of you, I get to the point of landscapeness in what do you recognize a landscape. So this image is a photo of the carpet, which is a representation of the landscape. But I hope to get with those works to a point where it's not an image of a landscape, but you do experience a landscape. You can find a landscape in it. I put to Tanya that just said the feeling of is your individual story so interesting? No, it's not. But it might be interesting the way actually you try to communicate it or create a space where somebody else could relate to it. And I think that happens in the landscapeness I'm trying to evoke. But when I think about work of the last, dinosaur, 25 years, I started with this very self-observing, sort of self-questioning focus on my body, on the body. And I think through that time, my notion of landscape, whether it's a social, cultural, historical landscape, but also taking more and more distance from me as a body, or as a social body in a context, who's created through the physical landscape, but also through psychological, social, political landscape I grew up in, and I find myself in constantly shifting context. I think that distance I find more and more useful and helpful to have that, to create that landscape of communication rather than occupying a very nearly sort of private space, which very often is not very inhabitable for somebody else.
So you're talking about more of for you, this notion of landscape, both embodying the personal body, but also physical space, and sort of the slippery nature of psychodomesticity within that sort of narrative of landscape as it leaves the personal.
You say slippery, but I'm also interested in those landscapes. The great thing about a landscape is wherever you shift, there's another part of a landscape around you. So I have never framed fears because I never framed it. So, but I think it is also the way how with this shifting perspective, you have a sort of ever-shifting relationship with it, but if you think about the landscape of the tables, which are in the room behind us, I think it is the way how you can play or dream yourself into a landscape. I think we all have doll houses or other things. The possibility to find yourself or get lost in a larger context, but also where the micro and macro shifts, where something might be the landscape of a table, but you might find yourself actually getting lost into it, becoming part of something which is smaller and larger than you.
Thank you. Osman. So this is another image of a work that's in this utility, and your practice is sort of informed by the utilization of sound and body, especially as it relates to questions around capitalism and equity. Can you speak more about the regional legacy of sound and social movement in terms of capital and how these themes are related to your practice? Because I think it comes up quite a bit.
Great, thank you for the question. Probably there's a lot of criticism around capitalism, but if we can agree on one thing, what it does is it sort of obfuscates or abstracts the sites of production, sites of labor, sites of environmental resources that eventually, where kind of eventually commodities come out of, right? So by doing that, by kind of abstracting or obfuscating that process, what it allows for is potential for violence. Violence on people, violence on labor, violence on environment. So in some ways, because of that, there's a lot to be talking about. I'm going to specifically talk about the chairs, which were put there, the blue chairs that are there, which sort of tries to sort of think of that violence. In this case, let's say the violence of losing resources. The consumer is usually abstracted away from that violence through commodity they might be looking at. But I think there's time now for us to kind of, and in a way we become complicit. So how do we not become complicit? How do we become aware? So in a way products can talk about, commodities can reflect that violence. In this case, by missing limbs, and requiring kind of a certain relationship with the user, the end user, the consumer, in completing the tasks that are asked for. Again, as an artist, these are sort of kind of projected ways to say, look, there's a different way to respond, not the typical commodification, fetish ways capitalism does it. That there are new relationships we can create with products that reflect their own making. Kind of on that, and because there are two pieces and they're slightly different, there's other types of capital. There's social capital, cultural capital, which may not be quite as much as kind of economic capital and the power that comes with it. But there's a lot to be said about sort of cultural capital and who creates it and where does it come out of. And very often it comes out of, and Detroit's a great example, it is not through the power structure, but through the marginalized. That sort of a lot of cultural capital is created. Now, of course, there's appropriation and how the power structures take it over. That's a whole different thing, but part of my thing is recognizing Detroit's sort of history in creating cultural capital, not only for the city, but for the country. And kind of recognition of those who have done it, but also those who will do it, right? So those who are represented in that cultural capital, in those bigger narratives, and then those who are not, but then tomorrow, those will. Seeing myself as a kind of newer immigrant to it, what are the new voices that will be part of that cultural capital of Detroit? And what does that mean, and one's role in that? So just sort of two types of capital, which I know have a fraught relationship, especially with power and money, but sort of two ways of looking at it.
Thank you. Tiff, your work specifically addresses culture within the city of Detroit, the language of the city, the historical legacy of Detroit, and how that sort of operates within a larger context of Black history. And so in your work, you deal with a variety of material: acrylic, steel, yarn, wool, rope, etc. Not limited to those things. But I'm sort of wondering about how I see your work very much as existing within archival practice, and at our next next talk, we're going to talk more about that, but just how your material choices sort of inform this archive of language that you're creating.
Well, I don't know. I've never really wanted to be one of those artists that, make the same thing over and over again or variations of that. And I think half of that has to do a lot with me starting off making jewelry, specifically looking at the body that was kind of on the verge of commercial, but not. So, I would do the Ann Arbor art fairs. I think I've done it like maybe 3 years in a row, at one point in my life, and I would just see these booths and this would drive me crazy. To just be locked in or just be expected to be locked in, in this way. And I know that happens particularly in the art world, and especially depending on what your relationship is with galleries, they want you to be able to make a certain thing and spit it out over and over again. But I never wanted to be a one-trick pony, so it just really depended on the conversations that I wanted to have. And so that really determined the materiality. And so half of that, I owe, that way of looking to Iris, goat, right as the ball time, if you didn't know. But yeah, basically, Iris basically helped me determine my material language, especially when I was starting off at Cranbrook, knowing what I wanted to talk about, and specifically how whites appropriate Black culture but don't really want to have anything to do with Black people. So what material is that, or how do you even begin to talk about something like that, such a large topic. But I would have to say that just me never wanting to be really locked in into one particular conversation or box is the reason why I explore a lot of the materiality.
And Tony Ray, the pig is frequently referenced in your work. Can you talk more about what the symbol of the pig means to you? What are the connections between the pig as we see this piece 0.00, which is in useless utility, and your other work, which is more painterly, mural-based works?
Well, I use the pig because it helps me express myself. And it's also a way to communicate with as many people as possible. I would say that, a lot of artists paint humans. You see them everywhere. But I figured, let me make something that is more, I can connect with people on a different level. Religiously, we use it in a lot of our products, especially in America. It seemed like the best thing to use to break down the things that I have on my mind. I mean, that's pretty much the brief breakdown of it, because it's way deeper than that, way deeper.
So you're talking about religious symbolism, but also, for me, the pig is all referencing institutions such as policing, cops.
Yeah, you can look at it in all those ways.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that I do it just to say F the police. That's definitely part of it. But it's way deeper than that. You can, animal rights, just even how we use it throughout history in America. The different parts of the animal that we would eat, how we eat, a lot of the products, a lot of pork is in a lot of our products, and we don't even know it. So it's a good way to communicate with people all around the world, and depending on how I manipulate it, pig in my painting or sculpture or anything like that. But you know, and it's also a way to hide symbols and subliminally send messages in your subconscious mind. So you may not get exactly what this means right now, but if you sit back, think about it, sit on it, and you might think that I'm saying something, but you know, it's up to you to figure that out. So it's just trying to be as effective as possible with the type of artist that I am and the particular artist that I am. So.
I mean, the pig and the wolf in the sheep's clothes, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, and this one was way before the Gucci thing. So
I didn't see, the Gucci thing?
that was before that.
Okay.
So God told me to put this together, so I made it. And it has a lot to do with that for sure. But that's that.
So,
In the Bible, talking about Jesus' hair was wool, and when you were younger, we were like, so Jesus was black?
yes.
Right? Okay, so I saw that connection, and I thought the pig was a sheep. So I also I kept thinking of all these ways that we didn't really see each other's work, and then all of a sudden the show, and I thought about colors and how the colors related to the bright palette that I was using in some instance, and I guess I was thinking more formal qualities that our work had to have the connection that was made. I don't know about. I did what
So, I mean, in some ways, you've unified it through labor and domesticity. So in some sense, that lens exists. Again, for me, the works are quite different in that end result, but that maybe is a certain commonality that we might be thinking about in our own different ways. Also, what that truly means, is the domestic, kind of the intimate, or is it a much more public kind of condition that we can share our stuff? I'll leave it at that for now.
I think you bringing up domesticity sort of takes me back to what James said at the beginning, talking about how his work shifted from more narrative-based painting to these use of materials as a way to talk about certain things. And you mentioned the towel and the fabric and the doormats that we see in this piece, and I guess I want to hear you flesh that out a little bit more. It's just like your material choices and the way you're dealing with the notion of domesticity, because it's unremarkable that that is a doormat. Like, I recognize that, I know that, and so how has that sort of choice shaped some of your works?
Yeah, that piece is unique for me in terms of using having the bath mats being so apparent. Usually it's, I'm going back and forth and trying to figure that out, but usually they're a little more camouflaged, and so you get, it's, to me, the initial desire is to kind of have these variations on the surface, different levels of, like what I say, disruptions, but it is undeniable that it is a bath mat, and I don't think I've fully reconciled that. I'm not trying to totally, I'm trying to keep it open.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the move of putting a bath mat on a painting vertically is kind of absurd and strange, but I don't think it's the first time it's been done. I'm sure Rauschenberg did it many, many years ago. But the initial idea is what I liked about the bath mat is these certain bath mats had a texture to it. I thought it would be an interesting thing to paint over, to see what happens with that disruption, how it's going to react to the paint, and how, again, that could lead into another space of something that I'm trying to get at, that I think is, that exists in the natural world too. It's like I'm trying to recreate something that I feel like I've seen before out there, but having the specific domestic reference, you know, I don't know.
I mean, you're talking about reproduction, and that's something that Tim mentioned earlier. Not like, I think it's interesting, or maybe Amanda too, just this idea that art, like the notion of reproduction, where that fits into an artist's practice, right? Like, oh, I sold this piece, so now I need to reproduce it because that's what people like. Or like, oh, I need to make 100 of these prints because I need to make them in an edition, or I need to print out this photograph, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Use the same symbolisms, and I guess I want to get a little bit more into this notion of reproduction, especially in the context of the Rust Belt and this like idea of factory and being able to reproduce the same thing over and over and over and have it sort of have the same quality to it. And so maybe, Tiff, if you can talk a little bit more about reproduction, maybe even Diana, because I think you both talked about it a little bit, just like what does that mean for your practices?
Well, I think it's interesting because my background started off with jewelry, so the whole jewelry game is based on, you know, repetition and reproducing that same thing and modifying it for a little bit and selling that, you know, and time is money, you know, so nobody's gonna spend like a week making a chain, but I would spend a week making a chain, you know, but half of it is, I'm not trying to have everybody look the same, and I think that's very Detroit aesthetic for the natives. I imagine that you know what I'm talking about, because it would be a serious problem if you go out and you see somebody with the same outfit that you have on, you know, so this level of originality and definitely specific to jewelry. I mean, my dad would go get custom jewelry made, and I would go with him all the time, you know, and so it was always about being original. I think, you know, since I've been moving outside of the body specifically and thinking about scale and, you know, landscapes and things like that, you know, that mentality basically has carried over. So I don't know, I wish that I actually had time to make a jewelry line. I've been saying it every year, I'm gonna make it, it's gonna be this year, it's gonna be this year. But I just really don't have time. Like, I'll have to hire a whole damn crew just to facilitate that idea that, you know, it's not just an individualized, you know, piece of art. You know, I'm thinking about the world. So I don't know, I keep going back and forth, you know, on what that actually means for my particular practice. Do I really want, you know, everybody to have a Tiff Massey, you know? I don't know.
And sort of that makes me think about yours, what you said about how much time it takes to make those woolen pieces, and the sort of notion that we don't really talk about artist time. At least, I mean, I don't think we do. I can't say that for everybody, but I don't think that conversation necessarily happens. What does it mean to produce a work that takes an abundant amount of time and that never be seen or not necessarily known?
I think time is relative. I'm very impatient person. But there's a funny thing that there's certain techniques or certain ways of making where I can lose myself. Well, obviously that's where my patient lies. It's a certain speed, it's intention, it's being with something. But I also think that there's so little planned in what I do that I do need the time to sort of slowly dig towards what I want to do. And that affinity, and like that being part of the process is so essential to the work that I actually, if I can, don't want other people to make my work because I feel disconnected. Because the most part of the process is not being in my hands, so it's pretty. You also like to go away for a second from that process. You started asking about where do we find this work, all that looks first so different from each other. So I would like to play that question back to you. What were you thinking when you asked together? But I would like, I had a funny sort of, I think the date in this show I probably found most interesting to me was a day with Osman. And if you look at the work, you would think, like, well, that's so different. But I don't think that any object is an island, and if you look at the images in the interior, in the kitchen, so after labor-intense investment in work, I'm, I think, secondly most interested in the interdependency, codependency of objects, and the constantly shifting role they play wherever you place them. And whether they go in a wall, or they sit on a table, or they find themselves accompanied by other things, and that other thingness, I think, very often finishes the work for a moment. And the way Osman sort of uses this question of taste, but it's also the setting and what those objects become in relationship to each other in the domestic setting. Also looks very, very different. It's something I'm very interested in.
I mean, I think just, and Osman, you should respond to that, but I think that I wanted to make sure that the show included work that was very different. I think in order to sort of represent the dynamic sort of landscape that sort of occupies this region and how that's not exclusive to one thing or one medium, it felt important to have multiple interpretations of that. And I think that the six of you had that sort of something else was there. And I think, you know, knowing how all of you work, whether it's in the studio, in your home, how much you all work, how much labor I know goes into your respective practices, it's sort of wanting to see the leftovers of what that was, and not using leftovers as a term to sort of diminish the work, but to uplift the work. Like, these are what is produced is the leftovers of your labor, essentially. And I felt like that showing the diversity of how that exists in terms of artistic output felt very important to me. So I think it was a wild thing, and I'm like, we should, Zeb and Larry were just like, it was a little wild, but I think it worked out. And I will add to that I, like, some of you are native to Detroit specifically, some of you are not, some of you are native to the Midwest, some of you are not, and I think that there is sort of this important conversation about labor that exists in how you all have either gotten here or have lived here or were born here that is not excluded from the conversation. And I do think it is a conversation. And I didn't want to blanket statement that. Like, I didn't want to be like, this is a show of this kind of artist. I wanted it to be more complicated than that, so people can come to their own assumption or own conclusions about things. But I think, are you ready to respond to that? Sorry, I distracted you. Yeah. No, I just, if you had any comments about it.
Thank you for bringing it up, but sorry, there's so much going, I don't know if I'll respond directly, but first thought was the side of reproduction and what it means in today and tomorrow's, from a kind of economical point of view. Sorry, I'm going to jump around a little bit, but you know, we were used to a kind of four-desk system, but the future is actually quite different. We won't be working in reproduction, we'll be working in permutation. Things will be built on demand in a certain way as you need it. So there's some differences probably emerging. How does artistic practice reflect that? You know, there's easy ways you can say, okay, we're using digital fabrication, things like that, but I'm curious always about how that would change notions of labor when it isn't, you know, even the idea of reproduction is sort of questioned. Is it a reproduction? Is it instantiation? Is it an iteration, permutation? And especially when we start thinking about the original in light of that. Sorry, that's a blank statement of just thinking about that term for the contemporary. As far as labor, then, yeah, I mean, one of you hinted at the devaluation of artistic labor. We are never paid for what we do. Funny enough, or similarly in the domestic situation, people taking care of a household are not paid what they duly deserve, be it a man or a woman. I think I looked up a statistic, it should be at least $120,000 job to maintain a household. We get away by paying cheap, immigrant labor or undocumented labor maybe, but that's not right. I'm not even sure where I'm going with all of this, but just these terms and I guess how I'm thinking about some of these terms. So the other part of labor, which is kind of the joy of making. So maybe the word labor isn't right, but actually the joy of making. So we can talk about all that kind of capitalist craftsmanship, but there is a joy I think we all have in making, in the discoveries, in the kind of unknowns, in the failures and the successes, in the possibilities. So I mean, there's something there that maybe everyone shares here, sort of has a kind of creative energy.
I think so. No, that reminds me of something I asked Tony. I'm sorry, I think I said that. Tony, you sort of coming from this painterly, but also straight up mural graffiti background, where your work is more so centered in this idea of the original. Like, this is the only time this image will appear on this wall ever. I'm curious about, because I think to me then the pig is that reproduction. You're using the pig over and over and over. That's the reproduction, but the image is never the same. And so I'm wondering what that means for you.
What it means for me, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's therapy, and I can always come back to the same thing and still create a different conversation or have different symbolism. I mean, you can think about anything, it'll come back to being able to incorporate it in a pig. I mean, just the same way how we can manipulate the entire body of the pig into whatever we need in our products is the same way you can get someone to connect with however I manipulate this pig. Just like I made, this piggy bank that is functional, and let's say I sell it for $4,000, but how do you know it's not $4,000 in there? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you know it's not $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 in there? You know what I mean?
Just so you all know, you can put coins in there.
Yeah. It's a slot within the slot, a smaller slot. But and just the symbolism combined with other symbolism inside of it, I'll be able to, if I want to do abstract with it, I can do abstract, express that, a technical part of my art. If I want to make it look real, I want to make it look realistic, I can paint that if I wanted to. So it's not really the technical part, the techniques that I'm trying to impress people. I'm trying to be as effective as possible as a black artist to me, which is, I want to see a result after. So I'm trying to capture the viewer. I don't want them to walk by my painting after 5 seconds. You know what I mean? So I use color, symbolism, subliminal messaging, whatever it is to get that viewer to stop and think to themselves, why did I do this? Why is these symbols together?
I think your comment about is this work could sell for $4,000, but you'll never know how much is really in there is sort of interesting, especially in terms of thinking about artistic practice and labor and what does something actually cost. What's the cost not only monetarily, but on the body, on the domestic home, on the family, on the friendships, you all have other jobs or other things going on besides just making. And so trying to think about those things as an important facet that I do think implicates one's artistic practice. And even if you are spending most of your time in the studio, you're here tonight giving this talk too. So that is a form of labor, that's a form of work.
Tony,
And that's why you're slicing these damn pigs open.
Slice pig.
Okay, so it gets deeper. It gets deep. But in order for me to really discuss this, I'll be here all day. But let me start.
I'm here, I'm listening.
Let me start. Okay. So years ago, professionally, I started off tattooing, and the best way to learn to tattoo is to use a pig skin, like pig skin. So when I was at work, and I work as a chef, I would take home the pork belly, and I would clean it. I would set it overnight and clean it overnight, let it soak, and then the next morning leave it out room temperature and start tattooing it. So that's another way. This is deep, and also just being like having to break down pigs and cook pork. I don't eat it. I don't eat pork because of, and it gets deeper again after that. If you go look into the Bible and the Quran, and also why it is, why people don't eat pork, is not just because it's a trend. It's because pigs have different ways of getting toxins out of their body. It's not the same. So they hold a lot of different bacteria and things in their body longer than other animals do. It gets deep.
That's okay. We don't have a ton of time left, but thank you for that call-out tip. I appreciate that. I guess that before I open it up to the audience, do you 6 people have any questions for each other?
I just have criticism, so. Jova, I really think that the exhibition that you pulled together was the shit, and it has nothing to do with my participation. I think because of me being a Detroiter, I've definitely seen exhibitions here since the opening. And I would have to say that this is definitely one of the strongest exhibitions that I've seen, and I mean that.
I agree.
Iris asked why. Always. Yep. And that was actually the reason why I went to Crankbrook, because she asked me why. None of the other institutions was questioning what I was doing. Wayne State, Eastern Michigan, not to call them out, but somebody needs to. The reason why I thought it was a good exhibition, I think because of the variety of work, I think because of how your eye moves through the space. I think the quality of work as well, you would see that type of exhibition outside of Detroit, New York, not to say it like that, but New York is basically the art mecca, essentially. But I think it's strong enough that it would be normally seen in that particular setting. So for me to come into this space, I think actually everything that's exhibited here during this time is really, really strong. But I think you killed it if there was a competition.
It's so funny. You're great, thank you. Do you guys have questions for each other? Also, I do have like something that we haven't. I mean, you and Tony talked about being Detroit natives, but I guess regionally, do any of you all feel? I feel like I'm stating the obvious, but I feel like I have to ask it. Like how this region has shaped or shifted your practice, especially those of you who did not grow up within this region specifically. You did, Tony.
Say what?
Never mind. Go
Okay.
ahead.
I mean, how this region shaped my practice. I mean, one thing I was thinking about was just perspectives, and being here in the Midwest and traveling in other places in the United States with like race relations, here is mostly just black and white. It's just plain and simple black and white. Of course, we have like different ethnic groups here, but from my point of view, being from the east side of Detroit, my mom being from the east side of Detroit, my dad being from the east side of Detroit, and the history of the east side of Detroit, you just, it's, and being a black artist, you just have like this duty to speak up and say certain things, especially artistically, you know what I'm saying? And if you go to, and I went to Harlem last year, and I was on a train, and while I'm on the train, this woman just started speaking Spanish to me in a way that she thought that I was going to respond to her. And I kept doing like this, and she was just speaking, talking, and she stopped and she was like, "You're not Spanish?" I'm like, "No." And it just made me think like, okay, here is just plain and simple black and white history that we have here. But if you go over there, it's more culture. They have more culture, and that's how I would say it shaped this area, this region. It shaped my work because of the duty that I believe that I have within my work to say certain things, as you see and hear, and that's it.
So, Joe, I just want to say, I'm from Chicago, and I'm also coming from Wisconsin, so I'm from the Midwest, all about Lake Michigan, whoop, whoop. Detroit's is very special. I'm not sure if Detroit's East Coast or Midwest. I have to go back and forth. So I feel some people go, it's more East Coast than it is Midwest. So I would say being here, I've slowed down with my work a lot, meaning I've been looking a lot, I think. And also logistically, I don't have a car in Detroit. I've been here 4 years. And so just having to, and I can live anywhere without a car. Also, that's a challenge that I accept. So just having to come to bring the work to the show was also pretty hilarious. I was like, Jova, so I'm late. I'm telling you why. I don't live far from here. I could have walked. It would have been a 20-minute walk. But it was cold. And I was like, I'll just do the queue line, because in a city, because a city doesn't need a car. The city should have everything. You should walk out and boom, I can get there. I stood on that queue line for about 30 minutes. And then my phone died because it was so cold. So I had to walk home, charge the phone, and I Ubered over because I still didn't want to walk. And Joe was like, that's funny. So logistically, I think Detroit is shaped by like art practice, just because I've had to slow down and think, where am I going? How am I going to get there? What time is this meeting? How are we going to make it? Not taking a bus, not taking a queue line. Somebody let me get a ride. So I think logistically is how I think about it.
So to Tony's point, I think there's certain historic narratives that are really true, that sort of represent certain communities. But there's also a present and a future, and a present and future that I want to make sure I'm a part of, my community's a part of. There's a huge sort of Muslim population that's been here, making sure they have also voice in social and cultural capital as well as economic and political capital. So there is, and I pay all respect to the past, but also my role is also to understand the present and future, where I want to be part of that narrative.
Very complicated question. I think it has an impact on the world. First of all, I had to. Let me tell it in a different way. I think if I would have moved from Europe to Africa, India, I would have expected an otherness and differentness I would have known is very different. But I made a mistake to expect sameness moving from staying within the so-called Western world, and I think that confusion of thinking you know that something is based on reasoning, has consequences, stems from certain sources, is being built upon certain values, is part of a sort of complex taste system, and then figuring out that everything is just sort of, if you walk in the morning out of your house and every house has moved like half an inch to the left, you know it's not there where it was. you don't know where it quite is. And I think that confusion of questioning everything you thought you knew, a taste you thought, I mean, it's probably also the naivety and arrogance of youth that you think you have a certain taste. Being confronted with different value systems, but also materiality, and how environment has consequences for the people who live in that environment, especially moving from Amsterdam and a sort of like downtown place to the suburbs of Detroit. If you ever want to experience differentness, and that's what you should do. So I think it was more confusion, and it took me 4 years to sort of figure it out. So I think a lot of the work I do is basically coming into terms with shift of perception, taste, meaning of. I think when you look at the works I do, very often it's archetypical, very banal objects, bowls, tables, wash basins, if you think about that. But then they are not anymore what they were. They have shifted. They challenge your perception. They do not fulfill your expectations anymore. And I think, when I think about it, I think that that's what happens with you. If you think you know where you go, and then you end up somewhere you have no clue. And it's just an ongoing process.
Hi. I grew up in California prior to moving to Detroit, and still consider myself relatively new to Detroit. It's been a little over 3 years. Moved from New York. The space I'm working in now has completely changed. I've been able to enable me to make the work I'm making. I just couldn't get that kind of space in Brooklyn. So it's, so, and also, I'm new to Detroit. I'm learning so much about it, and for me, it's been a great balance of being able to really get into my work. I find a lot more solitude here. It's nice. That's more balanced for me, and also the other artists that are here, the community. And to me, it's all new and great. I don't know. I find it to be really refreshing, and I'm very happy to be, living downtown. My studio's in Island View, so I think it's a great community in the end. So very fortunate.
So I think I talk more about Detroit than it is, an important subject matter for my artistic practice. So a lot of times when I feel like I am making work about Detroit, it's probably reactionary. I think when I started to use Detroit as a narrative, I was curated into a triennial in Lille, France, and I was the only Black artist exhibiting, and Detroit was the national representative in France. There was Brazil that was in attendance, and Korea, and I can't forget who else, but that's when I really started to focus on the narrative of Detroit. And so for that exhibition, the walls were Black, the work was Black. I even had exhibited images of me taking my jewelry for a walk, and just the people who interacted with me, who wanted to participate, was just really giving that Detroit vibe and pose, when you're excited, you're at the club and you're with your friends. So I blew them up, huge on the walls, because, here it is, it's like false narratives, essentially. And so I think I'm always trying to combat them, especially when I think people are lying on my city. It's just like somebody lying on your name. You wouldn't want anybody to tell false stories about you, And so, being that I am the one that looks the way that I do, that 9 times out of 10 has the platforms that I have to basically keep it real, 100% all the time, So anytime I'm outside of Detroit, I become an ambassador, whether I want to or not. And that happened before Detroit became, popular for everybody.
Yeah, no, I think that is a very interesting point. I'm from New York, and I don't live there anymore because of gentrification and the impact that, artists are a part of that process too, right? We are, artists, those of us, we can't afford time or space or this sort of way of being to slow down and make the work and have it speak to all of our various different cultural, sociological, all our backgrounds, right? And so I think about how I couldn't do what I do if I lived there. At least I don't think I could. I might be wrong, but I'm not going to give a
chance exist in New York. I can't even imagine. Just the square footage you need for equipment and things. I don't know. I never wanted to go be a New York artist just to get around. You can't even breathe your own air, your own thoughts, So
yeah.
It was never really attractive to me in that aspect. But it's dope,
Yeah,
because everyone's there.
Yeah.
The network aspect of it is.
It's amazing, but it also, I think, built this curiosity in me specifically for this region, We're talking about cities like Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, etc. Just going all the way down towards the south, and just how these cities have totally, you go to New York and it's you have to work your butt off every second, and that's another kind of labor versus the labor that exists here. And I think that's definitely one of the goals that I had in the show is this is a unique way of working, and everywhere else is unique for sure, but this is specific and it's special and it's important, and the 6 of you people who are making very different work are thriving, and I think that was important to give us a salute to. So we are running out of time. If we have a couple burning questions from the audience, we can do that. I saw the back first, though. The back was first. Sorry. We gotta go to the back. I'm sorry, I'm trying to be fair.
Hello. My question is for James. It's Chase, by the way.
Hey.
I'd like to know, I feel like you spoke on what made you change, not your medium, but your frame more. But I want to know what made you switch your subject matter more from the figurative things to more abstract.
So you're talking about the shift, for those of us who weren't here at the beginning, from this to this?
Yes.
Okay.
It was a long process. So I just, the change came out of just wanting something different from the work. I'm not saying I exhausted that language, but I think there was a period of time in my life where that's something I wanted to make. I didn't really study figurative work going into art school. It was, I kind of had to teach myself how to paint, do these, they're very illustrational. Anyways, I just got tired of it, just wanted to change. Just wanted something else to speak to me that was deeper than I think I was getting caught up in the narratives that I was creating, which were very self-referential, but just felt anchored to it. I wanted to break out, and thinking that there was a larger way of communicating a feeling or an experience through material. So it was a very slow process, but this is where we are here now. So. Or I am here.
Yes.
So
I was wondering who came up with the title Useless Utilities.
I did.
Okay, so I was like merely thinking about Immanuel Kant, the 18th century philosopher who talked about art as something to be defined as purposiveness. And the more I listen to all of you taking a very singular approach, both to materiality, both to where you're coming from, how you relate to Detroit, and especially Detroit, because Detroit, everybody responds to Detroit in their own way, right? And that may be a valid way, or some people may think it's an invalid way, but somehow Detroit makes you respond to it. And so I'm really curious about this tension between a kind of 18th century, kind of almost 18th century kind of notion of aesthetics, which has some claim to universality, and that absolutely does not match with anything I've seen in the show, anything I've heard people say. And I was wondering how the artists feel about that kind of universal, at least kind of pretension of the show. And obviously all the work is so different that it's almost impossible to bring it under one kind of umbrella. But it's also, it's so clear that you had this kind of aesthetic idea in mind, and then people do whatever the fuck they want. And that's an interesting thing to me, that there is this kind of old-fashioned, almost traditional notion of aesthetics, and then people, especially in Detroit, because they are coming from different perspectives and bring different perspectives, but also are forced to respond to Detroit in their own way, bringing their own baggage. And I was like really wondering how you feel about being brought, and I love the show, I love all the work, and some of it I love more than others, but I'm intrigued by all of it. And I was really thinking about how do you feel about being brought under such a kind of universalizing umbrella, since all this work is so singular in its own kind of negotiation of this time and space and this location.
I think it depends on the work and the pieces, right, and where everybody's coming from. I'll speak to my piece in particular, the hot combs. So the title, Useless Utility, my first thought was the hot comb is something of the past in the Black community with women doing our hair. We don't use the hot comb, but we all own one. And that is directly a useless utility. Yes, and it's also, but it is also out of our past. We actually like to talk about it or use it when we get older. So we actually, older women in my family still use the hot comb, but we use the flat iron. But yet, it's something everybody I talked to at the show was like, I have one in my drawer just in case someone comes over and wants their hair straightened. And that's very important, because just in case. And so, but that's a good point. Like, then the other piece, I was like, what does that piece have to do with the title? Nothing at all. But hey, you're the artist. And but also it does in the sense that I'm thinking of, I tried to make a limp that I tried to work, and it actually worked out. I was like, I guess it's not useless. So I like what you have to do.
I think I should also clarify a little bit, or say why the name Useless Utility, because I think, in everything that I've been reading a lot about labor, the purpose of labor is to produce something of use and value. So my life is not valuable if I cannot produce something that has a purpose or a use, right? And then utility being the thing that is useful, the thing that is used, right? And so useless utility, going to this idea that this artist produces something for nothing, I think all of this is actually quite useful, though it might not ever serve a utilitarian or a utility, a purpose, right? The purpose of art, who knows what the purpose of art is? That's all subjective, all up to you, all up to the person. But I do think there was something about this idea of really in the term useless being used, I'm really trying to reference that notion of work as like being a useful practice in a way and a space that I might argue, like, I wish nobody, it's like the idea of capitalism, like we're all working towards what, for who? Like, my work is useful because of what? Is it because I say it is? Is it because I'm furthering the sort of way way that artists making in this region are seen by curating at this museum, I'm not sure. And so to me it was more of a joke, and also thinking about like surrealist movements, like artists creating work that's like, this is like non-functional, who cares? Like Jane put a bath mat in a painting and like let's give that painting so much value that it becomes way more than beyond its use. Like, to me, there's a humor in there that feels important, because I don't think I was trying to put any of these works on a pedestal, though I think they are beautiful. I think there's a moment of humor that can be explored by looking at the way artists produce that sort of speaks to these larger issues of equity. But hold on. I have to do a time check, because I think we're out of it.
That'll be fun.
Yeah,
Okay. I think if you talk about uses of utensil, and we would think about the sort of 18th, 19th century of utensils and usefulness, I think it is especially the term where utensils were there to be useful for us. But when you talk about uses, utensils, in how far do they activate us rather than we activate them, and how far does surrounding objects activate us in the sense that we have to figure out how and who we become in relationship to them. So that was how I made sense of it when you came up with the title, but obviously we all did different things.
Which I think is good, right? I mean, all of the artists knew the name of the show and how, sort of what I was looking for. We had a lot of conversations. Many of the folks either produced other works or changed older works. So for example, Tiv's Je ne sais quoi, I might have pronounced that wrong, this is one piece that has now been made into like at least 15 different pieces, I think, but when you look at it in the exhibition, it's viewed as like one or two pieces. And so sort of that being, like that was Tiv just like, we're like, okay, we're gonna like make this something else. We're not gonna show it as a certain thing. We're gonna like change it to a more bodily form. And I think that was something that was really fun in working with these guys, was just to like, everybody had their own jam, and then we just carried it away. I think we have time for one more question, and then we're gonna end up. Okay.
We've got one burning question back here.
Burning question.
Hi, thanks for being here. The work in the show is amazing. Thank you to the artists for making incredible works, and thanks to Jova for accepting the curatorial challenge. In group shows, I always think that, and this is where I want to be proved right or wrong, I'd love to hear from the artists, that these group shows provide an opportunity to create new connections or new networks, or to go and do new projects. And I just wondered if new connections or projects came out of the show for artists, given the opportunity. Yeah.
For me, what came out of this is a few things. I was challenged, extremely challenged by Jova, for sure, pushing me into another place with my art, and also gave me the opportunity to be in a show with my favorite artist, Tim. It just put me in a whole new state of frame of mind when it comes to sculpture and finding new ways to show, to express myself and the things that I have to say, stuff like that.
So this is, to give you all a little bit more information, this is Tony's first sculptural piece. This of this size. So he has other sculptural work, but nothing that is as large or complicated as this guy.
So just directly, in the short term, no, nothing's quite come out of it, but to kind of Iris's point, if we start looking at group shows or even art, not as objects in kind of dead zones, but rather sets of relations. So now there's a new set of relationships between certain works there, sets of relationships between the people sitting here, us and you, and the institution. So if we start switching our way of thinking of things, right? So they are networks, they are sets of relations. aesthetics or some other sorts, networking, things like that, then yes, I think new things emerge, new patterns, new bridges will emerge. But maybe that's a nice way to sort of rethink of things, not as absolute objects or finalities, but how we want them to relate to one another.
I think personally, I just like a curator who knows what they want. And so I like also to be told what to do sometimes, because I'm tired of thinking. And so Jova comes in and she was like, yeah, I want you, so you mentioned you wanted to do that, make that happen. I was like, okay. So that was a challenge for me, because I was like, I want to make this two-dimensional lamp come to life, and that's what we worked on. And she was like, and also, I want as many hot cones as you can make happen. I was like, okay, she's like, well, lots of them. And I prefer that. Sometimes you just need to be like, brain on hold, what would you like from me after we've talked and looked at my work and had a great conversation. So I like a curator who knows what she wants, so thank you.
You guys are great. Thank you. Is your question brief? Yeah. Okay, great. I think, unless you all burning want to respond to that. Okay. Thank you guys so much for being here.